Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome everyone into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Everyone, I hope that you're having a great day and you're ready for some Computer America. So today on the show, we have the one, the only Mr. Scott Schober. We'll be bringing him on in just a moment as we talk all things cybersecurity. We have a lot of recent day stuff. And, you know, of course, for the everyday user, we're going to, of course, how you can avoid doing these kinds of things. I know that not everyone is a Fortune 100 company and can lose, for instance, 700 million user credentials every single day. But hey, there are tips, tricks, and little things that you can do to make sure that you stay safe and your data stays safe. If somehow you get compromised, I promise it's not going to be something that from something that you hear on the show. It's going to be from something else. So everyone, computeramerica.com, that's all you need to remember. We'll have the show notes up after the show with all of the reference material, articles, stories, everything that you need to know. Will be right there at computeramerica.com. And of course, there will also be a link to our guest website. You can, of course, check that out yourself, scottschober.com. If you'd like to see anything that he's up to, he, of course, keeps that updated regularly with, his YouTube segments, his podcasts, his guest appearances, his conferences, his books, all that and more. He's a very busy guy. And hey, I'm really happy that he takes the time out of his month to be here on the program last Wednesday of every month. So everyone, why don't we go ahead and, of course, check us out on social media, so on and so forth. But why don't we go ahead and get Scott on and just get our show started. So as I said before, he is our resident cybersecurity expert, of course, author of multiple books, and latest was Senior Cyber Best Security Practices for Your Golden Years. And of course, hey, he's been a longtime Computer America contributor. Scott, welcome back onto Computer America. How you been? Been well, and happy to have you back on. And not to draw too much attention to it, but obviously, I gotta say, your studio background actually works very, very well as a green screen. That's it's actually very spiffy looking. No problem. Yeah, no. Yeah, no, I don't blame you one bit. Obviously, I think everyone has been, kind of working from home. That's an article that I was just talking to one of my producers about that maybe we might start writing, is that I feel like obviously everyone transitioned. Just found out that I had you muted. Scott, welcome back onto the program. All the stuff that you just said, and he said happy to be back on. And he's doing a green screen thing. I was thinking about an article that I might look into, which was the fact that everyone kind of quickly transitioned to a home office, and they kind of made the best what they did. They had to kick the kids out of the spare bedroom, set up their computer, that kind of thing. But so many places are allowing, and also workers are starting to kind of protest that, hey, we want to work from home. I was thinking an article that if people wanted to spruce up their home office, maybe makes, what would make sense as some good possible upgrades to a home office. And yeah, I think that'd be a fun line of, things to explore.
Yeah, I think that would be useful too. In fact, I just did last week, I had a nice discussion. I moderated a panel discussion and all talking about remote workforce and the cybersecurity implications, obviously. And if you do look at a lot of pictures on the web and a lot of the people that I talk to, some people's home office is maybe lacking in a certain way and could be a little bit distracting. So there are a lot of good tips and things that could be shared that would make it a lot easier to continue, if you want to continue, that I'm sure your boss and everybody else would appreciate. So it's not too distracting, but yet focused to whatever your livelihood is.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of it would probably focus on, kind of what would make an office, and, how to do that at home for, kind of on a budget. But maybe some of it would include, little things like maybe a dedicated work computer that no one else has access to, and, things like a VPN, just little things like that. That would make a home office better. And of course, I'm thinking of that because of, our segment today with security. So I wanted to kind of talk to you and just see, over the past couple of months, things have been crazy, but how are you doing? How's Berkeley Varitronics doing and all that good stuff?
We're doing fabulous. We're fortunately blessed, and I may have mentioned in past episodes, we worked right through the whole pandemic and things have not changed for us other than a protocol from health, temperature testing and washing hands and cleaning the building, so on and so forth. But work has actually picked up for us. We've got about 3 different large contracts simultaneously we're trying to focus in on. And most of our push, of course, is every summer this always happens. We close the 4th of July week. So right. We're trying to get everything out by this Friday the best that we can. So it's kind of all hands on deck and keeping focus with these different contracts and keeping our customers happy. And I'm greatly appreciative that the orders and the business has stayed at the level it has. It hasn't backed off despite what many people are facing as a result of the pandemic. And of course, there's a huge global shortage of many components and things like that, which is another whole subject. That's starting to really affect our productions and our flow and our planning. So it's something that's very concerning to myself as a business owner. And then the bigger picture, I look at the economy, how that's going to affect all of us. The big picture, it is going to affect us because it's pushing things out in some cases to next year till you can obtain these parts. So scary stuff coming ahead.
I was, and we've been keeping track on that because obviously that affects the everyday consumer, everything from availability of like graphics cards and things like that to cars, are kind of being short on production, and game consoles, little things like that. But I know that Berkeley Varitronics works with kind of wireless detectors and other things like that. I guess the global chip shortage would affect you. I had not put that together, so.
Yeah. Oh, it's tremendous. In fact, what typically happens is you have a critical component, might be something from analog devices or microchip or whoever. Mm-hmm. A lot of these things tend to dry up quickly because who goes for them? And just to your point, the gaming systems, all of the sensors and things that are inside of cars as they continue to expand. And of course, just consumer electronics in general, and people, there's a high demand, especially with the pandemic, for laptops, tablets, gadgets and things, because people have more time at home. They're not commuting as much. They're bored out of their mind. So there's a lot of spend in certain areas, especially in consumer electronics, and that pulls away from the products. So we're trying to build these critical security products, and we're running into a lot of problems with it because things have dried up almost overnight, it seems like. So it's very concerning for everybody out there. So hopefully it improves, but they are improving throughput at many of the foundries. They're trying to. There was a major problem at one of them, which added to this. Then you got COVID, which added to problems. Then you had tariffs and shipping company problems and logistic problems. So you've got probably about 3 or 4 things that added up to the perfect storm that's going to tell us we're going to ride this through into next year, at least from where I'm sitting.
And I think a lot of people don't, really put it together with COVID and how, maybe COVID would affect this. It wasn't just that, they couldn't open up factories or things like that. It's that almost globally, every single company said, we're going to halt all of our orders because we don't know, we don't know the demand. We don't know if we have the infrastructure to sell cars. And really, this whole thing started with the car industry. And then, so they, canceled millions of car orders. And so the foundries did not make millions of chips. And then suddenly, all the car manufacturers wanted to kick back up. And, that's such a huge global industry that, just that little hiccup for like 4 months caused this chain reaction that's going to last years. So the only kind of credit there is to it, and I know that, for you to make your components and your parts is one thing, but this is a problem that everyone will be facing. So it's not like, your competitors aren't going to be facing the exact same issues. So
everybody does. And what it does ultimately is it drives up lead times and it empties shelves for items that are stuck. For example, your car example is perfect. What did the car industry do to pivot? In some cases, they halted production for a number of weeks. And in some cases, they actually pushed harder on the low-end models that don't have all of the sensors and bells and whistles, so they could keep the production lines going, keep the salesmen selling, and the dealers busy. So now the industry is flooded with a lot more cars that don't have the sensors. And then they sold it with a promissory for some companies. It said, bring your car back to the dealer and you could pay a fee and we'll upgrade and add these sensors back in. It's good and bad, but some things it's a simple firmware upload. Some things it's ripping the panels out and carpets out to install these things into the wire harnesses and configuring it. So it requires a lot of technical ability on the dealer side, which is really meant to be done on the production floor, not 6 months after the fact as an upgrade.
Right. Yeah. It's not like Tesla where they put it all in your car and then you pay a fee to unlock the capabilities of your car after you own it. Not so much. They actually have to install what they didn't on, like you said, on the factory floor. So all that aside, and that's going to be affecting industries for a long, long time. We have a number of things that we can talk about. You sent over a number of stories. I also wanted to, just talk with you about Windows 11. That was a very recent announcement since you've been on. They, and just your initial thoughts. I don't know if you were able to catch the presentation of Windows 11, but it's the next major Windows system, and of course it means cybersecurity wise, if I have to have a tie-in for that, so many devices are not going to be able to upgrade to Windows 11. And Windows 10, it will be a legacy device. And Scott, you know better than most how legacy operating systems kind of still plague the industry. So many different industries.
Oh, sure.
It's an issue, but we'll probably touch on that later on. We'll, get through some of these stories. And I think a good place to start is this first one, because since you were last on, there was, of course, the whole thing with the pipeline and, us being out here in North Carolina and on the East Coast. Luckily, I work from home, so that's not really the biggest issue here. But seeing everyone go out, get gas, and of course, people were filling trash bags with gas. They were filling up all their cars and gas cans. They essentially made a run on gas and made that gas shortage. But it led the country to realize that our nation's infrastructure is very vulnerable to I would say like cyber harassment, but of course, hacking in so many ways. But yeah, all this ties in, that there was that event, there was the water, there was a water treatment plant in Florida, there were school systems and things that you have been on the show to talk about since, all that stuff, all of it leading to this first story where, and it's, I want you to kind of describe, and I'm assuming, not to get too much into politics, but I'm assuming you've been keeping track of what's been happening in the previous administration and then the current administration. I think that there was this idea that cyber criminals are an issue, cyber crime is a problem. The previous administration came short of saying that we are in a war over the internet, but, I think this administration has really started to push back on ransomware attacks, on hackers and things like to the point where they're they're kind of defining that this is an issue and we need a better approach to it. So in your opinion, let's kind of branch off story number one, White House ways cracking down on secret ransomware payments, pursuing hackers. What has changed since, in the past 8 months or, since these hacks started to become more commonplace?
Well, I think you make a good point. Now, what I think this is telling us here, I see a little bit of a line in the sand where they say, okay, enough is enough. This is really getting expensive. And now the government's involvement in it is starting to cost more money, and their time and their resources for law enforcement is being pulled away from other types of investigations because now they're heavily pulled into this and doing investigation where they're pulling in FBI and other law enforcement trying to help remediate these things. And it wasn't the type of thing where a small business is targeted and they lose $400 or $600 with a ransomware attack. We've talked about those in the past a few years ago. Now we're talking in the case where there are millions, in the case of Colonial Pipeline, which again is privatized, but now you've got a private organization working with government organization. And in the particular case of that, they shared upfront quickly the information. In other words, they shared the actual address of the wallet where the crypto was sent, which they shared with the FBI and other law enforcement, allowing them to kind of follow the trail. If you follow the money, you can usually find the hackers. You can find the bad guys. And to some degree, they did that. And it was very instrumental. And I use that as an example, how important it is to share information. If we're too embarrassed to bring out, I was compromised, or we hide and say, well, we don't want the headlines out yet because we're waiting for a futures earning call, then we'll release it for companies. A week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks could be destructive, and you may not get the money back. In this case, they got the money back or most of it back. Unfortunately, we saw crypto dropping a lot in value, so maybe they didn't get back the full amount, but who knows? But it really, again, helps us to appreciate the importance that the government is kind of saying, enough is enough. We're going to tackle ransomware, and now we're going to be doing some things that are proactive to fight back. And the one article I sent you over there talked about referencing that trick botnet and using some different tools that were used against the U.S., against the elections. They're going to try to do some things to counter and fight back against a lot of these cyber crimes, use it to their advantage. And of course, the sharing of the information is probably the most important. Asking companies that if they want to work with the government and they want protection from the government, they have to be willing to share that information immediately, so it could hopefully thwart other attacks down the road.
So, and this would get into, very easily the kind of political side where, private companies working with the government, people thinking that the government can't do all that much. But I mean, let's face it, people can say that all they want, but our three-letter agencies, FBI, CIA, for all, for everything that they do, they are very capable. And I think that's, and I know that I say that knowing that some of these agencies are your customers, but, local law enforcement all the way up to, these federal agencies. I mean, do you think that closer, quicker communication when it comes to these things, would that deter hackers, do you think, knowing that if they hack something that is, and I don't know where the line is too big, quote unquote. I know that when the Colonial Pipeline was hacked and shut down, the hackers almost immediately sent out a press release. That's the world that we live in. They wanted to tell everyone that it's like, oh no, we did not mean to cause that much damage. We wanted to cause some. We accidentally caused too much damage, and we'll, next time we'll be a little bit safer or, less awful. But still, do you think that quicker communication is going to act as a deterrent, or is this just the future where, it is a crime, and it's something that law enforcement was always kind of destined to get into?
I think it is going to make a difference because, and it will in turn deter cyber criminals, because now they realize there's a lot more government behind it. There's a lot more money and resources behind it. And the fact that in a sense they got caught here, not only the fact that they could now go prosecute and they could shut down some of these cyber crime rings, they understand each time there's a compromise and they catch the bad guys, they follow the money, they learn something. And the government is sharing that and using that more effectively across many different sectors so they could effectively shut down some of this stuff. And now I think what we're starting to see, and I think this is kind of ties in nicely with some of the stuff with Windows and some of the other hardware out there. Companies are starting to rethink this. They're saying, wow, ransomware is such a problem. We got to solve this with software. We got to solve it with detection. We got to solve this at the lower level within hardware, be it at Intel or be it some of these processors, to prevent some of these attacks down the road. So it's kind of baking in security technology. I was talking about this 5 years ago with a lot of companies with IoT. If they would just do that, and the problem was always, it costs too much, it costs too much, it costs too much. Now they realize how much it costs if they don't do it, and they're going back to the drawing board and saying, you know what? Maybe we should go back to spend a little bit more money now. It'll save us a lot more money later. So companies are starting to get it. Applying the right technology, hardware, software, firmware at the right levels can make a big difference. And it's going to make it expensive for cyber criminals. What does that mean? It really means they're just going to shift their tactics to something else. And maybe they'll get away from some of these IoT attacks. They're going to get away from some of these ransomware attacks, and they're going to find other ways to scam us or steal money from us or whatever the case may be. But I think it's important to see this. In my thoughts, this is kind of that line in the sand where things are starting to shift because people are saying enough is enough. To add to that, I presented recently up in Connecticut, up in Mohegan Sun. It was insurance liability conference that I was at. And it was very interesting hearing the audience and the questions that came up and some of the things that came to surface with some of the cybersecurity insurance companies. In some cases, they're backing out and not paying the ransom now. And a couple companies have put that in writing. Unless you comply with these additional sets of cyber compliance, that you're implementing best practices within your company and you can prove it. So it's not enough to just say, hey, I want to take out a $500,000, $1 million cybersecurity policy, check off the boxes, I'm covered, and now my risk is covered, and it offsets a little bit. Right. Now they're going to actually check and audit and verify, did you follow through on these things? Because oftentimes, and in the case of Colonial Pipeline, as they dug into the investigation, well, one of the things they discovered, I guess, is the vulnerability there was a legacy VPN virtual private network didn't have multi-factor authentication in place. So they kind of exploited a weak password in a sense, or a weak vulnerability there.
Just like SolarWinds 123. Yeah,
Yeah,
just like SolarWinds 123. It's and you know, car insurance. If we're running with that analogy, car insurance agencies will not cover your claim if you are driving with three wheels on on a car or something like that. Like your car has to be in working condition. You can't be driving recklessly. And so you can see that these insurance companies, although that kind of leapfrogs us into into our second article that we'll talk about in just a moment. But a couple of things I wanted to mention. First of all, if you're watching the video portion, you can see myself, you can see Scott. Now you can see this webpage here that is really annoying me because I was trying to find, like you said, you learn more and more about hackers as you kind of go through the process and you follow the money, find out where it goes. And I wanted to, I tried to go to an article that said where the hackers are located, because this has led to a lot of tension between the Biden administration and Russia, because it's not so much that maybe, I assume, Scott, you can correct me on this, but Russia doesn't necessarily endorse every single hacker, but they're also very lazy about prosecuting hackers that happen to hack other countries. As long as the crimes are done to other countries, especially things like the U.S. where there's a lot of money, then Russia's like, well, finding these guys is kind of hard and it's not really our priority. Blah blah blah. Anyways, I wanted to find an infographic to show where these people are from, usually from Eastern Europe and parts like that. This website, by the way, Scott, I do not recommend it, and it says things like hire CAPTCHA, settle.com, and kind of funny story. It just said the notification is blocked. It says click allow to confirm that you are not a bot, and it would say allow alerts, which I never allow on my computer for websites to kind of ping your browser with alerts and notifications. I keep hitting no, and it keeps saying yes, do it, and then I try hitting the back arrow, and the back arrow won't let me do it. And then, Scott, on top of that, it says and you can see what I'm looking at. That's the whole screen. It says, would you like to translate this page from Russian to English? That's the browser, saying that. So clearly behind the scenes, this is a Russian website to, kind of, boy.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I did some research recently analyzing some hardware-based products that were connected into our network here, which was kind of fascinating. And this was over the course of a few weeks. In the process of it, this hardware allowed us at a higher level from the software to see what the origin of where any potential attacks were. And I did see a percentage of them out of Russia. I saw a percentage of them out of China. But in fairness, I did see some out of the US too. So I think sometimes to make, maybe to your point, a blanket statement, and this is very oftentimes what happens with administrations, especially here in the US, they blame it on Russia, blame it on China. Are they guilty? Absolutely. However, it's not always the case. Sometimes it happens right here within the US. Sometimes it happens in other smaller countries. It really depends on who the cyber criminal is. Cybercrime can take place anywhere where there's a computer and access to the internet. So it's open. So we got to be careful if we make too many blanket statements and always blame those two certain countries, because really it is not always those countries. There's a lot of stuff going on right here in the US. Just like you see school shootings and you see other, terrorist acts sometimes on US soil, the same thing happens with cyber attacks.
Right. Yeah. And here we have a graphic showing where the origin of the cyber attacks over, I think this is the past 5 years or something like that, and kind of where it's from. And it's obviously, it would be kind of hard to kind of pinpoint this, but and it's where they are, where they're located, where they're from, blah blah blah. By 2025, cybercrime is expected to cost the global economy $10 trillion a year. And they mention that's a lot. Actually, since 2006. The point is, hackers are from everywhere, and they have a lot of reasons to do what they do, but the main reason is, of course, money. And they're getting better and better at it. And part of this is something that you talked about. I actually remember when this was getting very popular at the end of 2019, kind of September, October, November, was the first time that you brought to my attention this idea of insurance companies that will cover cyber attacks. They will pay your ransom if you happen to be compromised. And you saw the problems. I think everyone saw the problems very quickly that could come from that. And that is, of course, well, if an insurance agency is going to pay out, just like healthcare in the US or, so many other things, if someone else is footing the bill, then, and you're turning it into a business, and the rates are going to go up. The amount that you're going to pay is going to go up for everyone across the board. And now you're almost incentivizing, you're almost daring people to hit companies that they know have cybersecurity insurance, which brings us to very succinctly to our second article here, that cyber insurance could actually be a bad thing, because again, at its base level, you could say, oh, people are getting protected, they're taking this seriously, they're getting insurance, it's good, but it could also have the opposite effect.
Yeah, and it can, and I guess I try to look at it. There's two sides to the story in fairness, and it's important to realize. And full disclosure, does my company have cybersecurity insurance? Yes, we do. Do I think it's important? Yes, I think it is important. And why is it important? Because what it does is it does help you manage risk. Do you have insurance in case your building burns down as a company? If something else happens and, a flood comes through,
something catastrophic,
electric goes out. Yeah, catastrophic. And now we can equate, I think, cybersecurity, and specifically ransomware, as something that falls under that level of more catastrophic things, because it is such a business disruptor. Some companies, we had the internet go down on us and we had a power outage for part of our building, and there's not much you can do. It's almost like go home, everyone, and you don't know how long it's going to last. You can't do your job if you can't get on the internet, you can't get on a computer, you can't buy things, you can't ship goods, you can't take online commerce. It's a disaster. So I think it's important to put cybersecurity insurance in its proper place. More importantly, I think this article kind of touched on it. What's starting to happen is everybody raced out there to get cybersecurity insurance. And in some cases, it was mandated. We'll only provide other insurances to your business if you take on a cybersecurity policy to offset some of the risk. In that process, insurance companies, of course, made a lot of money. Now, unfortunately, insurance companies are starting to pay for it because the sheer number of ransomware attacks has grown logarithmically, which means they're going in there to, on your behalf, to negotiate a settlement and pay it. In the end, it's important to realize, too, the cybersecurity insurance company never makes a decision, pay the ransom or do not pay the ransom. That's solely up to the business owner. They make the decision. So you ultimately make the decision for your business, pay it or don't pay it. They provide you guidance and advice. And if you say, hey, pay it, then they'll in turn go in and negotiate and try to lower the actual amount of crypto Bitcoins typically that has to be paid out. So they're negotiating with a terrorist or a cyber criminal on your behalf in hopes to keep the cost down. But in the end, so many of these payments have gone out. It's now kind of flipped, and it's actually kind of encouraging the cyber criminals to concentrate on larger attacks, get quick payouts, and work with insurance companies because they know they have Bitcoin on hand, and they want to keep their customers happy, and they don't want it to escalate and the amount of ransom to increase. So let's negotiate, settle, pay it out, restore my customer so the downtime is not too much, because that's the other thing that you really have to, and the article talked about this nice. If you refuse to pay the ransom, what happens? Now you got to find out how to mitigate this. Do you have a backup? Oh, geez, we backed this up a year ago. Oh, shoot, that means we can only update these certain systems. And now we have other problems here. We can't make payroll. We can't print checks. We can't do, it opens up Pandora's box there. So that kind of pressures people to, get this thing up and running, restore the networks, get back in business, and move on with life. And that it makes it a challenging problem for the insurance industry. And I think it's only going to get worse, unfortunately, than better at this stage.
Right. This part right here is what you're referring to. Refusing to pay the ransom can lead to months of downtime. And of course, and it will be huge cost to attempt to restore their networks from scratch. And they actually find that paying the ransom is the lowest cost option. That is why, kind of whenever we talk about backup, make sure that you have a plan to implement your backup, because we've seen so many organizations, especially in healthcare, which is a really hard one to handle, that, sure, they'll have backups, but they don't have a plan to implement it, because the systems, like let's say if it's for a local city, you would have to have an IT person go out by hand to every PC in the area and do that. And if your IT department, even though they're very diligent and maybe a team of 5 has serviced 15,000 computers, well, is a team of 5 going to restore 15,000 computers by hand? That's almost impossible. So being able to implement, huge part of it. And with all that being said, I mean, to actually mitigate and have someone negotiate on their behalf, we had on another guest, and I could probably find out which one it was, but it's not even so much ransomware, because we saw this with a hacking of the makers of like a lot of big video games. And CD Projekt Red, I think, was the one that got hacked a couple of months ago. We've seen more and more that's got a new trend that's happening is they'll download everything that they're going to encrypt. That the hackers will download everything that they're going to encrypt, and then they'll encrypt all of your files so that you can't use them, and then they'll threaten to release the information that they have and not give you access. So it's almost like they're double dipping in terms of these hacks. Like, it seems like they're getting more, I don't want to say nefarious, because they're already nefarious, but they're getting more bold, I guess, in their hacks.
Yeah, and I think they're mixing it up a little bit. So when law enforcement hones in and starts to follow the money and can analyze, now they're looking at the open ledger with crypto and following where this money's going, and they can zoom into accounts and nail guys. They're going to mix the game up. They're going to try different tactics. They're going to keep guessing, I guess, one step ahead. Try this, try that, and that can be very effective, I think. And I think just the sheer size. They look at. Thinking about Colonial Pipeline, they paid out about $5 million just to regain access to their files there. And just thinking of that in comparison to most of the ransomware attacks previous to that, they were much smaller. Now imagine you're a cyber criminal and you're getting a payout of $5 million. What do you do with that? You can go spend a lot of money to grow your empire very quickly, as opposed to carrying out 10 different ransomware attacks for $500 here, $1,000 here, 20,000 for this hospital. Those are small potatoes. So they've kind of taken it to the next level of ransomware. And we saw quickly they got back, I think out of the 75 Bitcoins on the date there, they got about 60 Bitcoins back. So that is, I would call that success, and congratulations to law enforcement. That's something that they could point to again and again. And I think cyber criminals must have to pause and back up and say, whoa, we better slow down and think out this a little more carefully, because they're moving in and they're following the money and they're catching us now. And they're going to probably shift their gear to try to find quicker ways to get in, get out, launder the money, get the payout, and still try to maintain some level of anonymity, which is going to be harder and harder to do.
Right. And I was actually curious how they actually recover those Bitcoins. I found this article here, and clearly the FBI would not want to say specifically, here's how we got it back, because that then cues off everyone else, how to make their, make sure that their ill-gotten gains are safer from the FBI. But actually how they got it, I think that it might have something to do with, just finding the wallets. And Scott, I mean, it's really not hard. The same tools that the hackers use against these companies, Colonial Pipeline, so on and so forth, due to that leak that happened like 2 years ago, where the FBI, someone at the FBI accidentally leaked all of their toolkit, with all their 0 days and all of their hacking tools. Clearly, the FBI uses hacks to hack other people, other agencies, and hackers. Yeah. So part of me, Scott, this feels like part of it is they got someone within the organization that hacked Colonial Pipeline. They got the hackers with a bad link or something like that and took over their system and took the Bitcoin back. That seems like the most obvious thing to me.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is they're using good police work. And think about it this way: if you've got about 75 Bitcoins that were paid, you can follow the chunks of Bitcoins, because again, it's public information. It's posted on a ledger. It's not associated to the hacker's name and when he bought the details of that. But if you follow the flow of it, and the wallet's address, which they were given from Colonial Pipeline to FBI, it gives you little clues so you could start following. So now when you see a bunch of transactions, I think in this case, the 60 Bitcoins that were recovered were actually broken down, I heard, into 6 different accounts. So they try to chop it up and launder it a little bit to make it harder to follow. Because if you're moving around 75 Bitcoins, that's a lot of money. That's going to stand out, just like in somebody that's a bad guy and they're doing wire transfer fraud or other things. They try to keep it under $10,000 because it doesn't have to be reported to the feds and so on and so forth. So I think the hackers realize certain things, how to lay low on the radar, but at the same time, the FBI is carefully following them and using the little bits of information that they have to work against them. And again, like you said, they're not going to reveal all the details. A few things I heard too that I'm hesitant, I don't want to repeat, because it could give the hackers ammo for the next hack and how to cover that up. So it's good to have a few things on the good guy side. Yeah. So future events they can get nailed with quickly.
Yeah. And when we talked about that, it's almost like you have an address, and the way that they launder is, of course, you can make as many Bitcoin wallets as you want. Imagine if you have the 75 Bitcoin in one wallet, you make 100 other wallets, you send a portion of it to the 100 other wallets, those 100 wallets send it to 100 different wallets each. And then, of course, eventually you route it through a number of transactions that lead back to essentially a wallet that you still own. It's not impossible. And even on the screen that you can see right here, these are all of the latest Bitcoin transactions. You can see here that there's, hundreds a second, thousands a minute. And, you can see every one of these. Look at that transaction right here for just over $2 million. That one for $3.7 million. These things are happening. And like you said, they're all public. Anyone can go look at this and see these transactions happen in real time. So being able to follow it, super important. But of course, every passing minute that goes by, they can launder it just a little bit better. So,
and I think it might be analogous to credit cards too. If we ever had our credit card compromised, it probably was compromised a few $100s to a few $1,000s, and that's it. And guess what? Nobody is going to police and investigate and hunt down the money. When you're paid back, it's really the bank and the issuing credit card company that's saying, all right, Mr. Schober was hacked, issue him a new card, give him his money or he's not going to bank with us. And that's why about 3 to 4% of all the credit card interest fees are to cover credit card fraud. And that's the same type of thing here happening for all these compromises with Bitcoin and other crypto and ransomware attacks and stuff. A lot of it's not investigated because it's not sizable enough to make a difference to recoup it. In this case, $5 million and a public, or I should say it's a private company technically, but became a very public story. It's got a lot of media attention. Guess what? They want that money back so they could check off a box, hey, success case here. And I think they did a great job considering everything, especially with the timeline there with this particular case.
Definitely. And, just as you were talking about that, one of the transactions was actually 150 Bitcoin, which was another $5 million transaction. It's always fun. It's almost like you can look into everyone's bank account at the same time. You don't know who anyone is, but you can look into everyone's bank account. It's pretty strange how the money flows, but still. So there you go. All that being said, the insurance part of it, just like you said with the credit card companies, I mean, they'll work with people, they'll try to interject themselves into all of this, but at the end of the day, the best part would be if, I'm sure everyone would like it if no one were to get hacked. Looking at some of the other stories here, you actually have a YouTube video which I think is very relevant to what we were talking about, because we saw a hack, I think, at a meat packaging plant. I'm sure that you cover that in this video. There was that hack, of course, with Colonial Pipeline. There was the water hack as well. So many of these, and you made a YouTube video with PIX11 News. What did you talk about in this interview?
Yeah, exactly that. The never-ending ransomware attacks that keep going on, and we talked a little bit about, and there it is right there, about the JBS and the meatpacking plant, and really some of the implications. In this particular case, they certainly had plants here in the U.S., but a lot of plants abroad too. So it's really a global problem, and we talk a fair amount about that, and obviously where the origin of a lot of this is. And again, they trace a lot of this back to they believe Russia, and found a lot of the specifics to identify that in this particular case because it got so much notoriety there. I think this is not going away. And one of the points I brought up, I think even in this, is what about the refineries? I think there's 130 something refineries throughout the U.S. What if those are targeted next? We talked about water. Well, guess what? Water plant being targeted. So a lot of these things are going to continue to happen as days, weeks, and months go on. And the ante for ransomware is just going to keep getting upped and upped and up, especially as people pay the ransom. And that's what I wish could stop. But in my opinion, and I've been asked this many times, in fact, I even had a recent interview on this and asked the question I threw out there, to pay the ransom or not to pay the ransom. You get very interesting responses. And my opinion is, if it's going to affect life, in other words, if Ben had an emergency and had to rush to the hospital, and that hospital's being held under ransom, guess what? The onus should be on the hospital and your insurance and everything else behind it to pay that ransom because your life is on the line. That's important. If the ransom is something that maybe is not as important, then I think it should not be paid, or at least all efforts should be made to not pay that ransom and go after the bad guys and make an example of them. Don't just slap them on the wrist. When you do catch them, put it in the headlines and make an example of them to send the message to others. If you can, this is not going to be tolerated. And now we're going to go after you and everybody else doing the same thing. It almost seems like it would take, and I completely agree with you. I know it's very easy for people to get up on a soapbox or something like that and just say that no one pays it, no one pay any ransoms. It's going to be, this is better for everyone. But of course, when it's your business, it's your livelihood, and that's in jeopardy. And of course, like you said, people's lives potentially. You're going to pay it. It's going to be a very easy
easy decision to make at that point. But it almost feels like, you mentioned the word terrorist a couple times, and cybercrime didn't used to be, this way. Like you mentioned, we saw that a lot of Bitcoin was just, send us $1,500 in Bitcoin and we'll go away. Those numbers have inflated dramatically to the point of millions, like you said, and that will only go up. It almost seems like we need the laws of the past when it came to borders and jurisdiction and whatnot. It's really protecting hackers, because it almost seems like as long as you don't hack where you're from, you're going to be safe. It's going to be very difficult for law enforcement from any country, not just the US, but from, the EU, from China, so on and so forth. As long as you don't hack your own country, you're pretty good. You're pretty safe. That, I feel like, is the big catalyst, that if this is going to change, it's going to be, that has to change, where if you're a cyber criminal and you're hacking anyone, jurisdiction kind of needs to change a little bit in that case. But of course, no country wants to give up sovereignty. So that's that's a whole nother can of worms. So let's hope that they kind of get that. Let's swing the conversation back a little bit to Windows 11, if you don't mind. And I found this article here. I can, there we go. I can link this to you from CRN. And it's, let's see, I have it right here, chat, there we go, Alt-H, everyone, if you're using Zoom. So, but yeah, it's about Microsoft and their, and essentially what they talked about at their conference, and this whole idea of a zero trust system. Just because something is running on your computer does not mean that the data needs to be, freely, kind of open from one way to another. And Scott, this reminds me a lot about the vulnerabilities found in most processors, namely Intel, where I think it was like Ghost and Afterburner or something like that. These vulnerabilities that were hardware specific, where if anyone were to gain access to the system, they could essentially read the cache that the processor was using to these little tricks that Intel was using to make processors faster, because we all want faster processors, but it wasn't secure, and it was a hardware flaw. It led to 15 years worth of Intel products to be very susceptible to hacking, and it seems like that was the cutoff. When Intel fixed that back in 2017, that's the cutoff that Windows 11 is going to use, and everything before that, you can't patch it. It was a hardware flaw, and unless you go back and change the hardware, you can't fix it. So I wanted your take on this idea that Windows 11 is going to start from the ground up with security, zero trust. Data only needs to go where data needs to go, and they're doing that hard cutoff that that they can't patch. So, what do you think about Windows and Microsoft and security and their new stance?
I think it's a double-edged sword, and I think from the perspective of Microsoft, you look at Windows 10 that came out about 2015 or so.
Yep.
So it's dated, but since 2015 to now, we're talking 6 years of endless hacks, compromises, data breaches, many of which Microsoft has been part of, and by extension, maybe the companies they own, the LinkedIns and others. It costs a lot of money, and they've done a lot of research, and they realize there are a lot of vulnerabilities. They will patch it and chase it forever. And to take the next leap, I think it's important to start to look at hardware, and I'm glad that they're doing it. I think it'll make a difference. But there are some trade-offs, and the trade-offs, I think, is when you bake it in the hardware, if you don't get it right the first time, you push it out too fast and you got vulnerabilities, which there will be. Look at Apple. Apple launched the new M1. Immediately, I started hearing about some hardware vulnerabilities with security. Now, again, Apple is often looked upon as a premium play in the tech space that's usually more secure than others. They do a pretty good job, and I usually will back them up, but they've got some vulnerabilities and some things that they have to patch. They can't patch it. It only comes out when they burn the next rev of silicon. So that means what? People that have hardware out there, they're going to be vulnerable. So there's always that balance, and there's that trade-off with it. When you get it right, and you could stop the breaches and the ransomware and a lot of the malware that these systems use by using a good zero trust model, I think it's going to really help. It's going to help, and it's not going to then compromise performance and runtime and all the other things that malware software and virus checkers and things do. And they only stop about 15 to 20% of the junk anyway. So I'm glad to see this step. It's the step in the right direction, but more has to be done before it goes mass scale, I think.
A lot of what they're talking about that is now baked into Windows 11 and the operating system is, some of the best practices we've heard from, from professionals like you when it comes to securing a network. It's, the idea that you have silos of information, and those silos of information only talk to each other as much as they necessarily need to, and so that if one network were to be compromised, that doesn't mean that everything that you own is suddenly out there in the wild. And it seems like they're doing that on an operating system level. And they mentioned that using a combination of these features on test devices says that they have reduced malware by 60% on those devices, and that includes Windows Hello, device encryption, virtualization-based security, visor protected code integrity, blah blah blah. Essentially, they are implementing what we have since learned about security and doing it on an operating system-based level, which. Scott, I mean, it's also because Windows is like 90% of the market, but Windows is also the most hacked system out there. I'm glad that they're trying something at least.
Yeah, and I think it'll affect ultimately their business. I mean, who does Microsoft often look to as one of their biggest competitors? Not direct, but indirect. I always say Apple. Mm-hmm. So to me, they've always fought for years back and forth. And I would assume, and again, not to take anything from Microsoft, very successful company. They've done some amazing things. They've taken some hard hits on the world of security, though, especially older legacy products, because the mass adoption, they've done so well. That could be also kind of their Achilles heel, that you've got millions of ATM machines and a million point of sale systems and registers and everything that's using old legacy Windows that they're not supporting and updating patches to, kind of burns them, or at least it burns their brand. And that could be really, really hard. Whereas Apple's approach typically is it's a hardware play. They make money on selling high-priced, eco-friendly hardware.
Right.
And I think that people need to realize that. And I think that we should all applaud Microsoft for stepping up to the plate and saying, okay, we're going to try something a little bit unorthodox and make a difference. It's probably analogous to some of the stuff that's happening with ARM processors in the world of IoT, where they're talking about the next trillion devices that use an ARM-based approach are going to be much more secure. And that's a great step, because, again, that's a hardware approach to solving some of the problem and building in security with the focus up front, which, again, I applaud. It's going to take, what do they say, till 2035 before we actually will see the mass adoption and switch there. That's a long ways out. To wait 15 years till you see pretty much everything is secure. And then there'll obviously be vulnerabilities and other ways to hack that. But people are getting it now, and they're sick of it, and they're willing to pay maybe a little bit more of a premium to get it right in the hardware. And that's all good for everybody.
Definitely. And even more so important now that Windows 11 will also start allowing Android apps. And Android is pretty notable as being not too secure, although only specific Android apps. I think those that are available through like Amazon. So it's not like a straight up BlueStacks rip, but it's, you're going to be allowing more applications to be running on your system, so security is of course going to be tested even there as well. Scott, we have like 5 minutes left, and I think that should be enough time to talk about our last story here that is actually very, very recent. There was an article that was published just 2 hours ago, and I think you found one. This was published yesterday. So and it's been updated in the past couple of hours. But still, LinkedIn, I think everyone knows. And if you don't know about it, then you don't work with the circles that use LinkedIn because you are hammered with invites. Join LinkedIn, make a profile, put your entire work history, put all of your contacts, network. LinkedIn is just almost spam at this point. But hey, they have a lot of members. Well, that leads you to this one. And although, Scott, last time I heard about LinkedIn, they were in the news for cybersecurity issues because they allowed scraping. And scraping isn't exactly hacking, but for some reason, companies are worried about scraping as well. But still, this is the next level down. This is 700 million users, and I guess it's people, and I'm sure that you know this better than I do, it's people trying to sell the information that they stole from LinkedIn, and it says 700 million records LinkedIn sold. So what's going on here?
Yeah, it's pretty scary when you hear the headlines, results of it, and how much damage. It's not like they've got your credit card. Yeah, they got your phone, they got your email. Now, keep in mind, almost everybody that puts their email when they sign up and register on LinkedIn, they create a Gmail or Yahoo, a specific email they plug in there instead of their corporate email. But then again, that's probably been compromised in the Yahoo breach or some of these other breaches. Right. So either way, it's not that big a deal, but they got your full name. They know if you're male or female or other or whatever. So I think it's important to realize the amount of users. So in other words, LinkedIn claims they've got 756 million active users. There's some 700 million compromises. So basically they're saying is everybody was compromised on LinkedIn. Well, what does that tell you? Change your password, number one.
Kind of. I do want to say that this was, this is, so what I was thinking of here, they mentioned in April, there was a sale of 500 million scraped. Yeah, 500 million LinkedIn users that were scraped. This seems to be the exact same thing, but now with 700, because they said that, they had a sample of the database, not the full 700 million, but they mentioned email address, full name, gender, phone number, industry information. Again, Scott, I mean, I go on LinkedIn right now. I'm not going to do it, but I go and find all the information on anyone that I search. Like, that sounds like the information that is publicly available.
Yeah, you can kind of get that information. What you can't get it in is a convenient hacking database. So if somebody handed me a 700 million database that had those 700 million emails, it makes it very easy for me to use these automated tools and bots and other things to sell things, to target people, to put my spam campaigns out there. So it's really about convenience. In fact, I think they put out, if I remember the article right, there's about a 1 million sample database, a teaser, so you could check the authenticity of the actual compromise, which is very important. Those are usually fresh accounts they put out there. And the same thing is done with credit cards and other things where bank accounts are stolen. They want you to test it to prove to yourself, hey, this is legit. And then you'll pay the highest dollar if you want the actual database. I think what's going to happen is marketing companies are going to look at this and say, wow, there's some value in this. I don't care about trying to use this to hack people. I'm going to take this and market the world of LinkedIn to sell more products and service, more than we're already marketed. I found there's a huge, tremendous uptick in kind of the spamish campaigns on LinkedIn. And this was my fear years ago. It was a great platform. I still love LinkedIn. There you go. You can see my LinkedIn profile up there.
And really, I just pulled up your profile because I'm talking with you. And, this is what's available on you. Of course, first, last name, your companies, your work history. Like, this is probably what they're trying to sell. But like you said, it's more of the it's more of the format, the giant spreadsheet that can be used, right?
Convenience of it. Absolutely. And I think that's something that people should just keep in mind, that there is value for convenience. And anybody knows that as a company and manages your sales database or your target database, and you're maintaining lists, and it takes time, it takes effort, it takes money. So this is convenience for hackers. That's what this ends up being. It's a shame, but it's true. Change your password, number one thing. Multi-factor authentication, number two.
Yep, and of course, very, very important. And right now, it's for sale, Scott. I'm sure that within 6 months to a year, when it's no longer as kind of quote unquote fresh, and it gets into more hands, everyone will have access to that 700 million. Just like I'm sure that anyone who was really looking for it probably has access to the Equifax hack or the Yahoo hack or any of these. It's just kind of sprucing up these master lists that we find every so often, and it's very possible that you end up on these spam lists or these call lists that are probably asking you to look into your extended car warranty. So often things like that. So I mean, no private information. Of course, best practices, don't click on links, and you could see an uptick in potential phishing attacks and things like that. But Scott, I don't know. It's in LinkedIn's terms of service, and of course, I think LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. Don't scrape our services. But at the same time, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, I mean, scraping them seems really easy that any bot could go out and do it.
Absolutely.
Do you think these are really newsworthy? Because it's going to keep happening, and it's going to happen more and more.
It's going to keep happening. No, they got to do a better job of protecting users' information. It's difficult, but it's a fact.
Right. There you go. So, Scott, the music in the background means that we are done for the day, and I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the program, and I'm happy that you were here to make it. I hope that you and your family, and of course your workers and everyone, has a great 4th of July weekend. It'll be a long weekend for everyone. Stay cool out there. Hopefully the heat wave has broken and everyone can enjoy a nice, relaxing weekend. Scott, I look forward to talking to you at the end of July, if not sooner, if something happens. Let's hope nothing does. But cybercrime, it's really heating up. So there you go.
Yeah. Thanks again, and stay safe, everyone.
Stay safe. And everyone, once again, if you want to hear more from Scott, any of his recent talks, conventions, and of course his things that keep him up at night, everything and more, scottschober.com. Until next time, have a great one. Bye, everyone.